This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we've had families who have included their teen children, as long as you feel they're mature enough to be able to process the information that's happening. If your parent or another close relative is still alive, you can include them. Or friends that are really close that you know will be part of your life if you are at a point of end of life or not able to make decisions. The more people who know what it is that you want, the better chances you're going to have of actually having that happen. And they're also going to be able to support the healthcare agent make those decisions when the time comes, because even when the healthcare agent knows what you want and agrees with it and understands it, it's still a really difficult emotional decision to make. So the more people who know what that decision is and what you want, the more support that person can get. When you're having that conversation, schedule a time, have people come in, if you know food will get them there, say, hey, we'll order pizza, or we'll have, chips and dip and some drinks. And if you have little kids that you need to be taken care of, get a babysitter. Do things so that you can really sit down and have a conversation. And so that everybody can have the time to ask their questions, set ground rules so all of the conversation is respectful and supportive, but also make it okay for people to express any fears or sadness that they may have about having this conversation, so that you make it safe for them to do that. And understand that some people may get angry, and as long as they express that respectfully, then I think it's okay to allow them to to express that, because it's not easy to talk about end of life stuff, and it's scary, and they might not agree with what you're choosing. And if that's the case, that might not be the person you want to have as your healthcare agent. So any questions on that? You can put them in chat, or and Sandy can tell me. So, all right, does everybody have the document, the Georgia Advance Directive for Healthcare, that is on the screen right now?
Betsy, can you hear me, Betsy?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yes, the link to the document is in the chat in case you guys need to access it there. And I will be monitoring the chat for any questions. But every once in a while, if you just want to say, are there any questions, I can try to hit the unmute all, although I just hit the unmute all and, I'm not sure how many, you'll have to individually unmute yourself if you have a question. So if Betsy says, does anyone have a question, I'll hit the unmute all, and then you'll also have to unmute yourself on your side of it. So just keep that in mind, or put your question in the chat and I can let her know what the questions are then. Okay, I'm gonna hit the mute all again.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I had to unmute myself. I'll have to remember that. So, interestingly enough, Georgia has been at the forefront of end-of-life care and hospice care in the United States for a very long time. So it has also been in the forefront of implementing updates and new advanced directives acts. And so back in July of 2007, it just so happens it was the first July that I lived in Georgia, so I was very interested in this. Georgia voted in a Georgia Advance Directives for Healthcare Act. And what that did was take the Georgia Living Will and the Georgia Durable Power of Attorney for Healthcare laws, and it sort of combined them into one document to make it easier for people to fill out and to understand. That one, I think they might have missed a little bit of a mark on because it can get confusing in parts, but at least it's one document and not a whole bunch of documents that people had to deal with before. If you look at the, on page 4, of the, you'll see the little flagged sections here. These are the parts that that have changed and the effects that the Advance Directives for Healthcare Act has had. It's important to know that if a person has had a living will prior to July 1st, 2007, if it was created between March 28th, 1986 and June 30th, 2007, they remain valid until revoked. However, if you have a client or yourself or a parent or a friend who has had a living will for a very long time, it's a good idea to suggest to them that maybe they go ahead and fill out the Georgia Advance Directives for Healthcare Act, just because oftentimes as we age, our choices may change. And as we age, we may change who we want to be our healthcare agent. So it's always good to review it and see other things that are different. I myself have done that once now, and I have changed some things. So, but particularly if what they have is a living will or a durable power of attorney for healthcare, both those things remain valid, but encourage them to go ahead and to review it and look at it and fill out the new form because it has the new statutory language. If they do choose, you'll see on page 5, if they do choose to complete a Georgia Advance Directive for Healthcare, it does replace any other advance directive for healthcare, the durable power of attorney, the healthcare proxy, or living will that is currently in place. You cannot complete this form and have the other things remain valid. So, but if you're completing this form, you're probably making different choices, so that's okay. So under definitions on page 6, I think it's important to look at definition 9 of life-sustaining procedures, just so whoever is filling this out, whether it's you or you're helping somebody fill it out, they understand that life-sustaining procedures shall not include the provision of nourishment or hydration, but you can direct for that to not happen or to have it happen. So those two things are not included in the definition of life-sustaining procedures. It's important to note because if you don't want to have a feeding tube, or you don't want to have fluids, or you do want to have those things, you need to make that selection further on in this document. So I wanted to point that out to everyone. The term life-sustaining procedures doesn't, you can continue to, as we all know, get medication for alleviating pain. That definition also does not include the performance of any medical procedure deemed necessary to alleviate pain. So just be aware of that. If there's something specific you do not want to have happen, it is here in this document where you want to make sure that it gets written down and explained to the person who is your healthcare agent. Now on page 7, the certification of terminal condition or state of permanent unconsciousness. In order for the withdrawal or withholding of life-sustaining procedures can happen, it takes 2 doctors. So it's good to understand that you know, somebody just can't come along and say, they're at end of life, you know, let's cut it off. 2 doctors actually have to agree. The attending physician and another physician that are aware of your case, they have to say and certify, yes, this condition is found to meet the conditions for terminal condition or state of permanent unconsciousness. So let's go to page 9. There are actually 4 parts of this document, but here it just says 3. The 4th part is your signature page. The first 3 parts you don't have to do anything with. The only thing you have to do is sign it. But if you don't put anything in the first 3 parts, there's no point in signing the document. So, which makes sense to me. If you're not choosing anyone or you're not choosing any things you want or don't want, then why sign it? So who can make an advance directive? You have to be of sound mind, and you have to be 18 years older or an emancipated minor. I encourage, you know, if you have kids who are 18, 19, 20, 21, sorry, I took a drink there. I encourage you to have a conversation with them and to have them fill this out. There have been a lot of cases where young people have been at points in their life where they have been unable to make decisions about what they want. And maybe what they want is different from what their parent would do for them. So it's really important for them to delineate and indicate what they want and what they don't want. So encourage your younger children or friends around you to create one of these. So turn the page. What can a healthcare agent do, or what can they not do? On page 10. So your healthcare provider directly involved in your care cannot serve as your healthcare agent. So you can't ask your doctor or your nurse practitioner or your social worker or chaplain. And this is good to know because sometimes you may have patients who want to ask you to do it and you can't do it. So So what is the duty of the healthcare agent to act? Really, the healthcare agent does not have to act even if named. But if they do choose to act, they must not make decisions that are different from what you want. And in fact, there are huge penalties if a healthcare agent chooses to act and makes decisions that are opposite of what you want. If somebody else, and that's why you want to tell a lot of people, because somebody else can say, no, you're not doing it right. And here, I have a copy of that. And it's also good to let your healthcare agent know that. So all of their actions must be consistent with your intentions and what you want. Otherwise, what's the point of having them as your healthcare agent? So they are authorized to, admit you into the hospital, admit you into a nursing home, admit you into hospice. They can withdraw consent from, refuse, withhold any types of medical treatment. They can sign and get delivered all kinds of equipment. They can negotiate and sign contracts for healthcare. That does not mean that they are responsible for the bill. So if I have my friend Tim as my healthcare agent and I go into the hospital for 60 days, which hopefully he would have already signed me up for hospice and I'd be at hospice house, that's a different story. But he would not be responsible for any of that costs. Now, if this gets a little complicated, because if your healthcare agent is your spouse, the spouse may be responsible for some of your medical costs. They have the right to see your medical records. They cannot, however, consent to any psychosurgery, sterilization, or involuntary hospitalization or treatment under the mental health code. So they cannot do something that would be, well, I don't know if it would be against your best interest or not, but they cannot involuntarily place you in a psychiatric unit. That, of course, would have to be based on a doctor's recommendation. So, any questions on that? What they can, what they can't do? Okay. I think it's also important to know that your healthcare providers are supposed to follow your decisions and your healthcare agent's decisions for you. If you are still able to speak for yourself, this is on page 12. If you are still able to speak for yourself, then and you know your doctor is unwilling to comply, you yourself should get a different doctor, or if you're not able to speak for yourself, your agent can arrange for a transfer to another healthcare provider. If your agent decision is to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining treatment, and your attending physicians don't comply, or make a reasonable attempt to comply with what your wishes are, it is their responsibility to transfer you to another physician who will comply with it, or allow you to permit your agent to obtain another physician. It is important to know that there are also pretty big penalties for facilities and physicians and nurses, anyone who knows of a declarant's wishes, has been told by a person's healthcare agent what they want, and then they purposefully do the opposite and don't have a good reason for that. So that's important to know if you are a healthcare agent, because I have not read yet of anybody bringing a case against a hospital or another healthcare agency because they haven't followed an advance directive. I do know, however, that not following advance directives has happened. So know as a healthcare agent, if this happens to you and you feel the fight is worth it, that you should do that. On page 13, how do you revoke this advance directive? Easily enough. You can complete a new one. So when I reviewed my advance directive and wanted to make some changes, instead of doing the changes on the original one, I just went ahead and filled out a new one. So that new one revokes the old one. You can tear it up and destroy all existing copies. You can verbally state that you want to revoke it and then do that within writing within 30 days to your doctor. This is important to note. Marrying someone after completing an advance directive revokes any other agent other than the declarant's spouse. So if you don't want your spouse to be your healthcare agent, which is not unusual and it's perfectly okay, you will have to redo your advance directive, put the person you want as your healthcare agent, and maybe I always suggest making a note to the side that says, I am purposefully choosing this person instead of my spouse to be my my healthcare agent. Just so it's perfectly clear that that is who you want making your decisions instead of your spouse. My mother did that because she knew that my father, who loved her very much, would not be able to, even though he agreed with her decisions, would not be able to carry them out. And that's an important consideration to make and to think about when you are choosing your healthcare agent. And on the other end, divorcing someone after the execution of an advance directive revokes the designation of the spouse as the healthcare agent. So right now in the state of Georgia, if you don't fill out an advance directive at all, which I don't recommend, but let's say you don't, and you are married, your spouse is automatically your healthcare agent. So again, if you want somebody else, you have to fill this out and purposely put that person in there. If you fill this out and make your spouse the healthcare agent and then you divorce them, you're going to have to fill out a new one. So just keep that in mind. Once you have completed this form, you're going to make a ton of copies, because a copy is as good as the original. And you're going to give it to, of course, the healthcare agent, hand it out to your family, your friends, give it to your physician. If your physician's office says, we don't keep this in our medical records, you look at them and say, that medical record is mine, so put it in there. Candler used to have at their front desk a little slot that says, place advance directives here, and then they would be put into your healthcare record there. I'm not sure about that. I used to, until I got a different car and everything came out, I used to carry a copy of this around in my car, for myself and for my wife. So, you know, keep it where it can be found. If you get a copy of the critical conditions, they have little cards, little wallet cards. So as many people who know that you have an advance directive and what your choices are, as many people as you can get to know that and have copies of this, it's fantastic. Any questions through that? That was a lot of information. All right. Sandy, did anybody have a question? Nope, okay. So let's actually go to the document now, the Georgia Advance Directive for Healthcare. Page 1 of that, page 1 of 15. You will print your name and put your date of birth at the top. It's important, so people will know it's yours, but also that you're delineating, yes, this is what I'm doing. As I said before, there are 4 parts of this. The first part is where you choose the person to be your healthcare agent. The second part is where you make your treatment choices. The third part is where you nominate a person who you would want to be your guardian if you would need a guardian. Of course, that will always be up to the court. But the times that I've been involved in something like that, it has seemed that the court has taken the person's recommendation into consideration. And the fourth part, of course, is your signature. So what's important to know for the signature is that bolded area. If you are of sound mind, but something has caused a situation in which you are not actually able to make your signature, it can be signed by someone else for you in your presence and at your express direction. But if you are able to sign it, of course, you should sign it. People have witnessed people making an X. So the signature part is actually very important. So page 3. This is where you choose your healthcare agent. And it's important to remember that, let's say you choose a healthcare agent, but you don't fill out any treatment preferences, your healthcare agent is still valid. So let's say all you want to do is pick a healthcare agent. And you can do that. So you would fill out part 1 and fill out part 4. But since you're here filling out part 1, you might as well fill out 2 and 3. who do you want to have as your healthcare agent? You don't have to tell me that now. You don't have to tell me that ever. That's just a question for you to think about. Who is it in your life who you know you can trust pretty much beyond a shadow of a doubt to, while possibly being sad and scared a little about what's happening to you, if you are not able to make decisions for yourself, will absolutely take your wishes and make them happen. That's the person you should name there. And like I said, that may not be your spouse. So you will put their name, their address, their telephone numbers, as many telephone numbers as you can have, because something may happen to you and your person isn't with you. As many ways as the ER or wherever the hospital, wherever your person you are, as many ways as they can get in touch with that person that they can have is important. The last thing you want to have happen is somebody doing something that you didn't want because they couldn't get a hold of your healthcare agent, or they didn't know you even had one. So on page 4, you don't have to pick backup agents, but I think it's important to pick backup agents because what if your healthcare agent can't be contacted? What if they're canoeing down the Amazon at the time and have no phone? I don't know why somebody would canoe down the Amazon, but they might want to do that. So you want to be able to make sure that somebody else is willing to serve as your healthcare agent until they can get in touch with your first choice and knows and will respect your wishes. So you will fill that out here. One of the most important parts about picking a healthcare agent and also picking a backup agent or two is that you ask them first. Because even if you are like, absolutely, this person would make all of my decisions, they may not want to do it. And that's okay. Some people don't want to have that responsibility in their life. They could love you to the moon and back and still not want to make those decisions for you. So make sure you ask them, have that conversation, sit down and say, this is what I want, and I'm asking you to make these decisions for me. Are you willing? And if they are, put them on this form. So we've already gone over some of the general powers of the healthcare agent, but when you give them this form, go over the powers and responsibilities with them so that they are really clear about what they can do for you when you're not able to make those decisions yourself. So, it's also important to know on page 6, you'll find this, that a court can take away the powers of your healthcare agent if they're not acting properly. So that gives all of us who fill these forms out a little bit of protection to make sure that our healthcare agent doesn't say yes and then goes off doing something completely weird and strange and unwanted. Page 7. Nope. Powers of the healthcare agent after death. This is the tricky part of this document. You have to be sure at points where it wants an initial of what you are initialing for. So at number 5, section 5, part A, my healthcare agent will have the power to authorize an autopsy for my body unless I have limited my healthcare agent's power by initialing below. So if you want your healthcare agent to be able to authorize an autopsy, you will not put your initials here. Leave that blank. If you don't want them to be able to authorize an autopsy, then you will put your initials in that spot by where it says initials. Of course, there may be legal things that come into play where you don't have a choice one way or another, and there's just going to be an autopsy done. Organ donation. This is the same thing. If you want your healthcare agent to have all the power in the world to donate your organs or donate your body, then you will not initial in those two spots under section B of number 5. If you don't want to donate any of your organs or donate your body, then you will initial there. But if you're of the opinion, yeah, go ahead, use whatever part of me that you want and let your healthcare agent have the power to make any decisions on the disposition of your body that you have talked to them about, then do not initial in that section. The final disposition of your body. My healthcare agent will have the power to make decisions about my final disposition of my body unless I have initialed below. So let's say you want somebody else to make decisions about what happens to you after death. You will initial there and then put their name and all their information down. But if you want your healthcare agent to make those decisions, do not initial there. So that's what's tricky. A lot of times in a lot of forms, where you initial is that you're initialing to be able to do something. Here you initial to not be able to do something. Any questions on that? It's important to really read each of those carefully so that you are initialing or not initialing what you want. If you go over onto page 8, this is where you can choose to tell people if you want to be buried or cremated. And here you will initial. So if you want to be buried, initial by buried. If you want to be cremated, initial by cremated. And then you might want to then take the steps to plan that with a local funeral home in advance if you want to do that. I encourage it. So any questions about section 5, about your powers after death?
Hey, Betsy, I have a question.
Yes.
So what would be some reasons that somebody would choose to have an autopsy? Or would that be something that would be requested by the hospital?
It might be requested by the hospital. A person might just really want to know what a person died of. So let's say somebody was under hospice and they died, and the family was just like, okay, we know the death certificate says, you know, a glioblastoma, but we really want to make sure what was happening in case anything was a genetic thing that we have to get checked out. I don't know.
Okay.
So then they would ask to have an autopsy. Now, the important thing is that if a healthcare agent asks to have an autopsy, somebody's going to have to pay for that. Because as we all know, autopsies are not free. So now, if there's a legal situation happening, then your healthcare agent may not have a choice to deny it or give permission. It might just have to happen.
Understand.
Okay. All right. Any other
Thank
questions?
you.
Sure. Good question. All right. That's if there aren't any other questions, we'll go on to the treatment preferences. Again, if you have not picked a healthcare agent, if you have not filled out part 1, part 2 can be effective. However, I'm not sure who you're going to, if you haven't chosen someone to be your healthcare agent, it's still good to choose what treatment you want, and you can give that to your physician or your you know, the hospital where you're at or the hospice you're in, hopefully Hospice Savannah. But this does remain effective if you do not pick a healthcare agent. It's just not as effective in practice. So part 6, or number 6 in part 2, on page 9. So part 2 will be effective if I am in any of the following conditions. And there's 2 choices. You're in a terminal condition, and it describes there what that means, an incurable or irreversible condition that will result in my death in a relatively short time, or a state of permanent unconsciousness. My condition will be determined in writing after personal examination by my attending physician and a second physician in accordance with currently accepted medical standards. So you can choose either or both. You know, that's up to you. You would initial there. So if you want one or both of those, you want to put your initials in that slot. And just know that these decisions aren't made, I think, lightly by anyone. So there's some pretty definitive things that would say you are in the condition of either one of these. And that keeps family members from arguing, or it can try and keep family members from arguing about, oh, I don't think you were actually in that condition, you know. So it helps with explaining it to extended family. So like before, we did not initial in most of those things in number 5, but in number 6, you will initial here. So number 7, treatment preferences. On page 10. So there are 3 choices under treatment preferences. Choice A is try to extend my life for as long as possible. And it has a description of what that means under that. Part B is allow my natural death to occur. So no medications, machines, or other medical procedures that would keep me alive but can't cure me. And in Part B, this also means you do not want to receive nutrition or fluids by tube or other medical means except as needed to provide pain medication. So it allows your natural death to occur and allows you to be kept as pain-free as possible, which is super important, I think. And then C gives you a little bit of flexibility here. And you can choose whether you want, you would put an initial at C if you want the following conditions to apply. So if you want a nutrition by tube, you would initial that first one. If you can't take fluids by mouth and you want fluids, you can initial that one. And if you can't breathe, you want to have the assistance of a ventilator, you can initial that one. And this is, of course, remember, and I think this is super important right now, if you go into an ER and can't breathe, but are still, you're not terminal and you're not in a permanent state of unconsciousness, you can still receive these if you want them, without having to initial here, because you're not in those 2 conditions. These only go into effect if you're if you're able to choose for yourself, you can say that, but if your healthcare agent is put into effect if you're have a terminal condition or permanent state of unconsciousness. So don't think that all of a sudden, if you go in to the ER because your appendix burst, that, and you've chosen allow my natural death, that they're just not going to do anything. So, I think that's a reasonable fear, but that won't happen, hopefully. And then if you turn the page, if you want CPR, you can initial there. It's kind of off put a little from the other choices, but if you initial at C, you have 4 choices that you can choose. It's just the 4th choice is on the next page. Does everybody see that? I'm going to assume yes. Section 8. This is a really important section. Even though there's no places to initial or anything like that, this is where you can put in statements of treatment preferences that aren't included in this form. So if you don't want blood transfusions for religious purposes, if you don't, if you don't want antibiotics for some reason, or in mine it says, if you hook me up to a machine, I will come back and haunt you for the rest of your life, and don't think I don't know where you live. So I just wanted to make it really very clear that that is not what I want. So please, you can, now, sometimes it's difficult for clinicians to follow all parts of your wishes, but it's your healthcare agent's job to make sure that your wishes are followed as much as possible. So if you want something done or not done, put it here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, all right. In case of emergency, if you are male, this does not apply to you, although you can fill it out, but it doesn't really apply to you. Under Georgia law, Part 2 will have no force and effect if I'm pregnant unless the fetus is not viable, and I indicate by initialing below that I want Part 2 to be carried out. So if your fetus is viable, the preferences you have indicated in Part 2 will not be carried out until your fetus has been removed from you under Georgia law. And if your fetus is not viable and you want your preferences to be carried out under Part 2, you need to initial there by where it says initials. Again, if you are male, not so much of a problem. Although who knows what choices are in the future. So is that understandable to everybody? I'm just going to say yes unless somebody interrupts me. Any questions?
No.
Okay. So Part 3 is guardianship. Now, a guardian is chosen by the court, and that happens if you are not able to make significant responsible decisions for yourself, as we all know. And you can initial by letter A here if you want to nominate the person serving as your healthcare agent under Part 1 as your guardian, or if you want to nominate somebody else as your guardian. Now the court can take your recommendation into consideration, or it can say, nope, we're naming a completely different person. It's really up to the court, and there's really very little that, other than advocacy, that your healthcare agent can do with this. But if you want somebody else, you will have to put their name, address, and all their contact information below. So, page 13, Part 4. This is the only part that has to be filled out. But of course, if you don't fill out any of the other parts, as I said before, what's the point of signing the document? And remember, signing this form will revoke and replace any other advance directive for healthcare, durable power of attorney for healthcare, healthcare proxy, or living will that you have completed before this date. Just remember that. if you want this advance directive to be only for a specific date, you can initial where it says initial, and then say this advance directive for healthcare will become effective on or upon some date, and then will terminate on another date. Some people only want to have an advance directive effective for, let's say, if they go into surgery, or or something like that. I have advised clients before that if they want this to be effective for always, but they want to make sure that that their healthcare agent is able to make decisions about their the disposition of their body, that they initial there and say this advance directive for healthcare will become effective on or upon my signature and will terminate on or upon the disposition of my body, instead of will terminate at until my death. Just to make sure. In part 5, you have also said that. You don't have to go back, Sandy, but I always want to make sure that the people looking at this document understand that the person I have chosen gets to make the decisions about what happens to my body afterwards. Excuse me, that's allergies. So, going to page 14, you must sign and date and acknowledge the signing and dating of this form in the presence of 2 witnesses. Now, this does not mean that when you sign it, there has to be 2 witnesses there. Your witnesses can be people after you sign it, who, if you walk up with your document and say, hey, I have signed this document on this date, will you witness that I have told you that and acknowledge that I have told you that I've signed this? Your witness must be at least 18 years of age. And it cannot be, one of your witnesses can't be the person who is your healthcare agent or backup healthcare agent in part 1. It can't be a person who is going to knowingly inherit anything from you or gain some sort of financial gain from your death. And again, it cannot be a person who is directly involved in your healthcare. However, if it is a person in a healthcare agency or facility that is not directly involved with your healthcare, they are able to sign it. However, if you can find other people to do it, I think it's better. But if you can't, and that's the way to get it done, then get it done that way. So this is where you are signing as a declarant that you are emotionally and mentally capable of making this advance directive for healthcare, and that you understand its purpose and effect. So if you've been following along and filling this out during this, this is where you will sign and date. Or if you're going to do this afterwards, this is where you will sign and date. And then if you turn the page, there are the places for your 2 witnesses. Remember, this does not need to be notarized. And a copy is as valid as the original document. That's why I recommend making a bunch of copies and giving them out to trusted people and to your healthcare providers, so that as many people as possible know what your choices are. A, so they get carried out, and B, so they can provide support to your healthcare agent when they have to actually make those decisions. I encourage people to review their advance directive for healthcare every couple of years or so. You know, if you're younger, maybe every 5 years. If you're slightly older, maybe every 2 or 3 years, just to make sure that your choices are still the same, that the person you have chosen as your healthcare agent is still alive. Because we know we've all been in that situation as providers where it's like, this person cannot make this decision. They're not here. And it's also good to check in with the people you have chosen to make sure that they're still in a place in their life that they feel capable of making these decisions. So, any questions, thoughts, ideas, constructive criticisms?
Okay, Betsy, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you so much for going through all this. As I somewhat expected, there is a glitch on my end, and I apologize. I have not been able to move my control, the thing that controls everything about the meeting. It's locked, frozen on my screen, so that's why I haven't been jumping in here. I would normally have just, made sure to unmute everybody and to be reviewing the chat. So if you guys haven't had your question answered, I'm asking you to jump in right now. I've lost control of moving that around. There's always glitches, so that I'm not actually that surprised. So I'm very glad that Betsy was able to get through all that. I was still able to move the document around, so I'm really happy about that. So again, please, if you have a question, jump right in.
I can see the chat. So if anybody has anything, oh, thank you. Thank you, Jackie. At first, I thought you were saying you were very thirsty. And I thought, well, get a drink. All right, give a couple seconds to see. Oh, thank you, Dallas. Appreciate that. Thanks, Aaron. So it doesn't sound like there's any questions. If some questions pop up afterwards, always feel free to email me or call me. And I'm more than willing to help you through this. Thanks, Aaron. Always willing to answer questions. So I think this is a really important document to have, and I'm glad y'all were here, and we'll fill these out. So thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you so much, Betsy. Thank you all for participating. I'll see if I can gain control of this back and maybe get this recording. It has been recorded. I hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.